Okay, I'll call the meeting to order.
So, Matt, go ahead and bring up the Pledge of Allegiance, please. There we go. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag.
United States of America, and to the
republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, could Allison do a roll call?
Matilda Novak.
Here.
Dick Olson.
Here.
Marilyn Smith.
Here.
Stacy Bartholomew.
Here.
Ray Kupczynski.
Here.
Alex Johnson II.
Here.
Bessie Johnson.
Here.
Jesse Brenneman.
Here.
Colleen Keller.
Here.
Keith Losey.
Here.
Will Summers. Will Summers.
Here.
Jared, thank you. Jared Taylor.
Here.
Terry Vernig.
Here.
Chris Hansen.
Here.
Did I call everybody?
Oh.
Okay, now I guess we do the election of officers. The current chair is vacant. I'm Colleen Keller on the vice chair. Secretary Jesse Brenneman. So do we have a pledge for the chair?
I'd like to nominate Will Summers for chair.
I'll second it.
Is he here?
Oh,
Yes,
Will
he's
is here.
Oh, all in favor, say aye.
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 Sounds-
the same sign.
There he is.
And opposed? Okay.
Doing great.
Okay. For vice chair,
I would move Colleen Keller as vice chair.
Second.
okay, all in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, secretary? Anybody have a,
I would move that Jesse Brenneman be the secretary again.
Second.
okay, all of, in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, I think we're done with that.
Congratulations.
And I guess at this point, the new chair takes
Oh,
over
yes,
the meeting.
that's right.
Okay.
So,
Well, thank you, Colleen. Couldn't have done it without you.
yeah, right.
Okay. So the next order of business is approval of minutes, the May 21st, 1919 ARA Budget Committee meeting.
Move to approve the minutes as written.
Second.
Moved and approved. It's been moved to approve the minutes as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. So, Peter, it sounds like we have the minutes approved and it's time for budget message.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Chair Summers, and congratulations to you and Vice Chair Keller and Secretary Brenneman. I noticed that nobody asked you if you're willing to run, but you stepped forward and took it on. So thank you very much. Congratulations to you. And to members of the ARA Budget Committee, good evening. Welcome to the first Budget Committee meetings of 2021. It's been a tumultuous 2 years since we last met. For some of you, this is your very first budget committee meeting, so we haven't yet met. It's unfortunate that we have to continue to meet in this virtual setting, but on the plus side, I'm very proud of the way that staff have kept the business of government going from day one of this pandemic. I hope all of you have had a chance to take the budget training provided by the Department of Revenue. I also hope you've had a chance to look through the ARA budget, as well as the much bigger city budget, and make note of your questions. Some of you have already asked questions, and Gina has emailed answers. You'll have plenty of opportunity to ask questions over the course of these meetings. But this meeting, the ARA Budget Committee meeting, should last, we've budgeted, no pun intended, an hour for this. So this should be much shorter. The Budget Committee meeting for ARA is scheduled first, simply because it's traditionally been a short meeting. After we conclude the ARA Budget Committee meeting, we'll adjourn. We'll take whatever break Chair Summers decides to give us, and then we'll reconvene as the City of Albany's Budget Committee in the same room to begin to tackle the City of Albany budget. There isn't a separate link for the City of Albany Budget Committee meeting. I was 39 years old, just a mid-grade military officer back when the Central Albany Revitalization Area Tax Increment Financing District was established in 2001, 20 years ago. At the time, policymakers anticipated that the district would sunset in 2025, which at that time must have seemed like a long ways away. Since then, the ARA and staff worked on 52 projects identified through community input. The Great Recession and other challenges slowed progress toward project completion, but staff, working with the advisory board, refocused efforts on completing as many projects as possible with remaining spending authority, and to realign spending authority with projected timelines for the work of the TIF district. TIF districts have provided communities with an important tool for partnering with the private sector on major projects. Used properly, they can incentivize the private sector to invest in revitalizing underused or otherwise blighted portions of a community, or to build out infrastructure needed for development. While TIF districts can be extremely effective and helpful, they aren't meant to last forever. They should be viewed as a tool to create momentum that lasts well beyond the period in which they're active. And at their sunsetting, the community is left with improved infrastructure, decreased vacancy, increased housing density, new private investment, and new private development opportunities that didn't exist prior to the TIF district. Furthermore, this cost of foregone property tax revenue to any and all overlying taxing districts is returned. There's significant increase over the taxable value of the district established at its creation, and taxpayers' bills are not directly increased. As we approach the next biennium, the focus of the budget is to partner and build. Following the direction established by the CARA board, the district is moving full steam ahead toward two primary goals. First is the Waterfront Project, which includes 13 projects from the original project list that have not yet been completed. And second is two large redevelopment partnerships in the St. Francis Roads block and the former Wells Fargo building. These long-term projects require continuity and commitment to be successful. They last beyond councils and they last beyond city managers. The Waterfront Project is well underway. After more than a year of direct staff on this project, our consultant team is set to deliver 60% design plans that encompass hundreds of unique public inputs, 3 public open houses, multiple adopted city plans, and years of planning. Construction will begin as soon as summer of next year. Because of this, we've moved a significant amount of money from reserves to capital projects. And likewise, reserves that have been building in anticipation of use on larger redevelopment partnerships for key properties in the CARA district have been reallocated in the partnership expenditure line item. The 2021 to 23 biennium will be a memorable one for Albany. The downtown revitalization that is well underway will take a great step forward with these projects. The Waterfront Project alone will create a lasting asset for the community and visitors, and the private investment it will attract will pay dividends for many years into the future. So at this point, let me turn it over to our Finance Director, Gina Yeager, for any public comment we may have received.
Oh, hello. Hi, good evening. We actually did not receive any public comment for the ARA Budget Committee. Nothing was submitted, written testimony, and nobody signed up to speak.
Thank you, Gina. And Chairman Summers, with your permission,
Yes.
I'd like to offer our Economic Development Manager, Seth Sherry, the opportunity for a few comments.
Okay, thanks, Peter and Chair Summers. You know, I don't have a lot to add to what Peter said. We thought about what we wanted to share in this message, but I will just share with you, I think last time we sat together with those who were here, I was a newer face. It's been a little over almost 3.5 years since I've been here, and it was pretty exciting for me to review the minutes from the last time we sat together a few years ago, because the minutes physically said we're moving towards building reserves for partnerships in a waterfront project, because that's what we've worked with and have been directed by the CARA board to do. And it was particularly exciting to me to now say, 2 years on, we're moving those reserve accounts to actual buildable accounts. And that was just it was neat to see the progress. And I just applaud those who have been a part of the process and in seeing the vision and the lasting impact this will create for the community. And to that end, some of the waterfront development projects, if you've seen the visuals and the mock-ups of what it can and will look like, that's exciting, obviously, but I just do not want to downplay the impact that's having on private developers looking at investing anywhere in the vicinity. And I'm particularly excited to just let you all know, and the CARA board here soon, that we'll be coming with a request for partnership on the Wells project just this month in our next CARA meeting. And they've repeatedly, the partners there have emphasized the fact that this infrastructure investment that's forthcoming on the waterfront is critical in them deciding whether or not they think it's a viable project. So again, very exciting to see these projects coming to fruition, and happy to answer questions as they may exist.
Any questions for Seth?
Yes.
Councilor Novak.
Yeah, my understanding is the Biden administration has an awful lot of money that they want to put toward infrastructure spending. And I would like to see what they might do for us with regard to some of those things that have been laid out in that plan that have to do with infrastructure. Have we considered that in any way, the Budget Committee?
And Seth, if I could take that, we certainly have. And as you know, we're in the process of looking at how to invest those parts of the ARPA funding that's coming our way to help the community. The city of Albany is much bigger than just its downtown. So there are very pressing infrastructure needs all around the city. CARA can only invest inside the urban renewal district. So those are kind of apples and oranges. If we are, and I think I have an expectation that we'll be able to get federal funds for infrastructure improvement, but we will be able to invest those in many, many other places besides just the downtown. And the downtown, of course, has been the beneficiary of urban renewal for the last 20 years, whereas other parts of the city haven't been.
I guess my point is I would want to see what the federal government can do for infrastructure. I don't think CARA money is meant for infrastructure per se. It's more for public-private partnerships, if I'm understanding it correctly at this point in my service.
It's actually, and at this point I should turn it to Seth again, but it's actually it is meant for infrastructure projects that will facilitate private investment. So to that extent, it is a public-private partnership where the private entity or the investor might not have the incentive to invest, we can create or set the table, if you will, with infrastructure development, which will then attract private investment. And that's specifically what it is for.
That's right, Peter. And I'll just add, it also comes to removing barriers that are difficult or, the private sector is unable to bear on their own. And Councillor Novak, I just want to let you know, as we've talked about over the last few months and beyond, the scope of the project alone on the waterfront will likely exceed on its own available spending within our maximum indebtedness. And we've taken very seriously the charge and the ability to look for other grants and matching funds, whether some of that comes through new infrastructure packages or existing funds through, for example, the Economic Development Administration. We've got some grants going with them. It's possible to offset some of the base cost here, and we'd be unwise not to look at those sources as well.
Councilor Olson.
Yes, the manager may have been, did you say the third grade or no?
I was a lieutenant commander.
But I was on the city council when this project began. And at that time, the main concern was a blighted downtown, that people were leaving, buildings were coming down or being abandoned. And the idea was that we need to get our downtown back to where it will be a usable, profitable, enjoyable place to be. And I think we're part way there. Some of our buildings have been repaired and restored. Matilda's building, for one. And the Vault 244 for another that some of us enjoy on a semi-regular basis. Hopefully it'll be open soon where we can enjoy their Pilsner beer again. But to me, the main objective of the urban renewal was to cure the blight and to get the downtown back on its feet to where it was an attractive place to be and an attractive place to live. And I understand people in the real estate business tell me that if you want to live in one of the apartments downtown, you got to wait till somebody moves out because they're in high demand, and you better get on a waiting list if that's something you want to do. And I've talked to a friend or two downtown that have upstairses, and I've encouraged them to come to CARA and get some help toward getting their upstairs to be, they're already apartments, but to get them livable and rentable. And the one that I'm thinking of at the present time was a couple of years ago. And he said, I don't know if I want to gamble on that. And I said, well, what do you mean gamble? CARA's got money, CARA can do that. And he didn't go into details, but I can see now if we're just going to abandon the renovation and the fixing of our buildings downtown, that he may have been right. And I think if we want to encourage development downtown, we got to show that there's a capability of getting some help if your project doesn't pencil out right to begin with. So I'd like to reinforce what Matilda said about the need to think a little more seriously about whether we put all our money on Water Street. You know, you go take a look at Water Avenue and you can't see the river. And it's not because of the buildings, it's not because of the trees, it's because it's too far away and there's a bluff there. You can't see the water from Water Avenue, most of it. So I got some other questions about the details of the budget, but I'd rather continue the discussion we're presently having. If anybody else has any thoughts.
Okay. Other comments, questions, or should we let Councilor Olson continue with the questions he has?
Oh, this is Terry. Oh, okay. Councilor Popinski's got a question.
Just a comment to compliments and kudos to Seth Sherry and his staff and staying the course and going through this whole process for month after month, slog after slog, as we've had some ups and downs, which we have had over a few years, and we almost came to the point of having it just actually stopped for about 18 months to 2 years a few years ago because we didn't have the political will to keep going forward. We could have had a lot of this almost completely done by now, but here we are, and we still have that opportunity if we keep plowing ahead and doing the right thing and continuing with the projects that we've already identified several times as being the priority for us. So keep doing the right thing, Seth.
So, Terry, did you still have a comment or a question?
I just wanted to know where it goes from here. I mean, you got a 21-23 budget here, and it goes to 23-25, right? There'll be another budget provided that will do more, in the future. It doesn't stop at this particular point, right?
Well, sorry, if I could answer that. Thank you, Terry, for that question. So here's what the near future looks like. It depends somewhat on construction timelines, but coming into this fall and winter, we'll be working with, and we've already engaged our bond counsel on how to complement the cash reserves that we have now for construction with any borrowing that would need to occur to build as much as possible as soon as possible, because material costs, as we know, are not going down significantly. Cost of building only goes up. So we would hope to have the entirety of the financial capacity to build in this next year to 2 years. So in the next biennium, if construction was complete by 2023-24, the Urban Renewal District, CARA, would primarily exist to pay down any debt that was acquired through its TIF revenue. And the activities would drop off significantly at that point. And keep in mind, we have 2 other large redevelopment projects that are sort of a part of the end game here in the St. Francis and Wells projects. But essentially it exists to service debt, and the potential to actually what they call an under levy exists, where you can actually back off the amount of TIF that is collected in order to satisfy debt service and also return some of that TIF to the overlying taxing districts. That's also a possibility. I can't promise that for the 23-25 biennium because it depends somewhat on construction progress and how much has actually been paid for and hasn't. Does that answer your question?
Dick got a question, but that seems like you're saying that this is the end game right now.
That's exactly right. We've been planning for an end game or sunsetting for 3 years at least, and you could say the 20 years has led up to this point. It was initially expected that the district would sunset by 2025. That's in the original plan. You can go look at that. It doesn't have to happen at that date, but it was meant to pace with spending and sunset in 2025.
Question.
Councilor Novak.
Thank you. And help me out. It is my first budget anything. So bear that in mind when I ask my questions. First of all, if I'm understanding correctly, this budgeting process, whether for ARA or the city, these are guidelines, correct? Not marching orders, guidelines. Am I understanding that correctly? Because if that is the case, my understanding of what we've done so far with ARA since I've been on the council, and I know other councils in the past have done other things, but to my understanding, we have paid $2.3 million plus for a study so far. That's what we voted on. That's what we've paid for. We have a study right now that has been dealt with. Plans that are 60% complete. So are we not still in the process of the completion of those plans? Because I'm excited to see what those plans will actually be. But unless I'm missing something huge, and I confess to you that I may be, and that's why I'm asking the question, my understanding is we have dealt with plans, $2.3 million plus worth of study from the people about the Waterfront Project. And again, as I say, if I'm missing something, someone straighten me out. But I want to see the plans completed. We haven't seen completed plans. So to talk about construction, are we, I don't want to run ahead of, and I know that Ray said, you know, we've been doing this for a while or whatever, but I'm just speaking to what's been going on since I am on the council, not what past councils have done.
Okay. Councilor Olson, I'm going to take Peter's comment and then I'll come back to you. Is that okay, sir?
Sure, fine.
All right. Peter, would you, you had your hand raised.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to address Councilor Novak's point. You know, these are projects that are big projects and they take a long time. So when Seth talked about the fact that the ARA board directed us, that was a decision and that was a commitment to a future. Now, you know, councils, legislative bodies can always change their minds, but it is not a good idea. It's wasteful of time, it's wasteful of money, it's wasteful of energy, and it doesn't reflect the will of the community. The community had decided through lots of input and through their council years ago to march in this direction. So certainly the direction can be changed, but that's ill-advised. There has been a lot of work invested and it's towards a good goal and it's towards the projects that have been identified as projects the community wanted to have completed. And again, that doesn't mean that it can't be changed. You can always change direction, but that sometimes when you're talking about large projects is not a good thing to do. And Seth, I would ask you to comment.
Yeah, let me just add too. So Councilor Novak, the price tag of the study you spoke of is actually really not a study at all. It is the culmination of years of study and planning to envision what's possible and plan for that. And in fact, what the 2.3 million encompasses was a 1.5-year project to not only finalize plans, but incorporate years of planning, which is not an easy thing to do. Get public comment on that in a bunch of different cases, which has happened at least 3 times, but also fully engineer, permit, and hand the city buildable plans that could be bid out. It goes well beyond a study, and the process of acquiring permits, understanding the permitting matrix, construction timelines, and fully engineering the plans is really what's happening right now, and we're well into that process.
Councilor Olson.
Yeah, I don't think Terry got quite the answer that he was looking for when he asked the question. And the question was, does CARA have to stop in the next year or so? And the way I understand it is no, that CARA is supposed to finish up when we have borrowed all the money that we are legally entitled to borrow and get it paid back. And they estimated to begin with that would be 2025, but there's no deadline set there either. So the question is how fast we go and how soon we get through with the borrowing and the paying back. And speaking of borrowing money, I'm looking at the budget on page 11, and I see various kinds of income there in the resources upper part of the page. And the first question I have is, we look at the current property tax. And for 2019 to 2021, it's $3,703,750,000. And that's for a 2-year period, isn't it? So per year, it would be half of that. Am I right?
Oh, you're talking about the adopted. All right. Okay.
I think we can let Gina speak to this, but Councillor Olson, it's roughly 4 million in TIF revenue a year is what we've been working with. I'm not sure why this says 3.75. Maybe Gina can speak to that.
What do you see?
Is she still on? There she is.
Hi, thank you. I'm taking a look at the budget. I will need to double check that. So let me look into it and I will get back to you.
If you look at
Anyway, in the next column over for 2021 to 2023, the 2-year property tax is $7,350,000. And if we look at the previous page, that looks to be about correct, because in 17-18, the property tax was about $3,247,000. So it's gone up some. And am I right that that's the full $15 per thousand rate that the that our taxing laws say that a person has to pay in terms of property tax? Anybody here know enough about taxes to know whether I'm right on that? Anyway, I think I'm right. And the amount that the city can get out of that 15 is about $6.40 per thousand. So that's when we pay our, what seem to be burdensome property taxes, out of the $15 per thousand that we pay, $6.40 go to the city, if it's regular city property tax. Now, if it's going to CARA, our urban renewal district, we get the full $15 per thousand. And some people rise up in righteous wrath and say, we're shortchanging the county and we're shortchanging the school district. Well, I haven't heard any complaints from the county because, well, they only get about $3.30 per thousand out of the 15. And when it comes to the school district, the $10 per thousand that they get, that all goes to Salem. And the people, well, I think it's in Salem. And they take the money from statewide and then they redistribute it on a per student basis. And one of the smart things that they've done in Salem in recent years, one of the few I'm thinking at this point, but so nobody really loses if we keep CARA going. And I think that we have a lot of reasons why we ought to keep CARA going for a couple of years and take the income that we're getting from the TIF and save enough to do whatever we decide we want to do on the waterfront. And the waterfront's going to be there in 2 or 3 years. The waterfront will be there in 50 or 100 years. And people will enjoy it then. But if we don't work on the buildings now, the people that want to do it, will they be here? If we get rid of CARA, will there be help? No, there won't. And will they be able to make it pencil out? I doubt it on some of the buildings that need help in our downtown core. And I would myself would certainly like to keep it going to where we can if we have a urban renewal CARA district that we're proud of, not buildings like some of those on First Street, where the roof is held up by some 2x4s, and the one next door is covered with weathered particle board. And to tell you the shame, I'm kind of ashamed of our, that part of First Street.
Mr. Hanson.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I had a process question, I guess. I'm a little confused what it is we're debating on. Are we having a value discussion around the remaining funding in the the TIF funding and whether it should be applied to the river or the Waterfront Project, or in diverting it to building repairs instead? Or is it in
Well,
addition to?
if you're talking to me, yes, I'd like to have a discussion on that point. And the council, the ARA that the manager and Mr. Sherry are referring to, that was last year's council. That was last year's ARA. And now we have a new mayor and we have 3 new council people. There's a replacement of essentially 4 out of the 7. And I think we need to do a little more discussing before we barge ahead and do what some people think is not a very good idea. So.
Okay. Marilyn?
I think this is a discussion for the CARE Advisory Board rather than the Budget Committee.
I think you're right. But if we okay this budget, we're putting our holy water on it, and then how do you change it?
There are a few things about the budget I would like Seth to expand on. Partnerships and capital projects. If you would expand on that a bit, Seth, I think those, I don't see line item numbers, but those are the topics of discussion there that I'm seeing.
Sure, Chair Summers, happy to talk about that. Again, I just step back real quick and look at the minutes from the last meeting. I was struck. I think, Terry, it was you who had asked about, well, what kind of partnerships are possible and who's coming to the table. And at the time, we were really working on going out and shopping out some potential projects and doing an RFP, I think at the time, for a partner on the Wells Fargo building, and also trying to acquire a position where we could influence the outcome of the St. Francis project at the time. So happy to report that development partners have been identified. The path towards partnership on each one of those is slightly different. And just very quickly, one property we have an option to purchase. And so by finding a partner, we can transfer that partnership to or sell to them. That's the pathway there. The other building, the Wells building, we actually own outright and again, have some control over the future there. With those partners identified, Will, both of those projects are at a mature enough place right now where those developers have done a heck of a lot of homework in getting bids and construction costs and all the barriers really well defined. So they're ready to move forward on those with an approved partnership, with some financial partnership from the ARA and the CARA group. They've talked about those in general terms over the last year on a number of occasions. And between May and June, we'll have concrete partnership requests that will develop into development partnerships that hold them to a certain standard of development and maturity with those projects. And that's what the funding will be tied to. And both of those projects have a September deadline to have development partnerships created and codified. So to that end, we anticipate those are big projects with real big gaps because it's very expensive to do significant upgrades in large scale to historic buildings. And they've been very transparent about what those gaps will look like. And as such, I know the money is not officially committed yet, and I'm not promising it by any means, but we're planning in such a way that we have the financial capacity to partner to the tune of the scope and breadth of these large projects. So
what line item are they on?
Sorry?
What line item are they represented by?
I'm pulling it up. Well, I don't have a number on my attachment, but
you don't have a budget thing there?
I'm sorry, I do, but the one that was published doesn't have a number in the column next to it like it has in years past, unless someone else has something different than I do.
Yeah.
So if you go down to
here's what it looks like.
If you go to reserve, infrastructure projects, and partnerships, those are the 2 line items I think Chair Summers was referencing. Those are about 2/3 of the way down at 2 million and 1.7 respectively.
What page are we on?
That would be page 11.
And what I was asking for a little more information on, you had partnerships, and for the proposed budget of 21-23, we have $6 million. And for capital projects, the proposed budget is 1.8 million, let's say, in that line. And those were some of the places that I was also looking at, because the reserve and that is zeroed out for this proposed budget. So I was hoping to get a little more information on what the partnership funds and the capital project funding were set to fund.
So Chair Summers, I just realized too, in comparing it to previous years, what we've actually done in some ways to simplify it is consolidate a capital reserve line items and put them into this one. And there's two main ones. One's for these partnerships where they're not specifically identified in terms of, they haven't been committed the funds yet. We've budgeted for it. And then the other one is actually just the capital projects line item. That's to ensure that we have enough cash on hand to potentially borrow for a much larger infrastructure project should we have the opportunity by this winter or next summer.
Question?
Councilor Novak.
Thank you again, and forgive me, I did not expect to have so many questions. But Seth, you had mentioned the barriers that we would need to overcome with regard to the St. Francis and the Wells Fargo, and I'm really glad you brought that up, because I know, as you said, the development people worked really hard to work that out and show us on the CARA board exactly what would be required to fill that gap and make it so that we could basically, at least in terms of the St. Francis, keep it from falling down and restore it, potentially, and make it something that we can keep downtown. So I just want to make sure, and again, forgive me, I'm not used to looking at monstrous budgets, and I'm a little concerned by both the fact that I don't understand really big budgets and the fact that, as Councillor Olson said, he didn't see a specific line item. I just want to make sure, for the record, that we have it in the budget, in the ARA budget that we will approve tonight, that we have monies allocated to cover those gaps that we've sat in the meetings for both the Wells Fargo and the St. Francis building, that the barriers, we'll be able to overcome the barriers, because my understanding, and I've toured the St. Francis twice now, if we don't manage those barriers, the building will fall down. That's basically what it comes down to. And we have a timeline there where it could happen very soon. So I have a real sense of urgency on making sure that we have allocated funds to cover those barriers on both the buildings, but especially, I guess, the St. Francis, which is the most dire. Thank you.
Councilor Novak, that would be specifically the partnerships line item there. That's exactly right.
Mayor Johnson, your hand is up.
Oh, I just had a question for Seth. So looking at where's it at? Yeah, the impact of the forest fires, cost of materials. Is there anything taking away from or costing us more money with these partnerships? Because of a piece of plywood right now runs $50, but when this budget came together, it was like 12. Is that going to impact the end result with these numbers?
Well, it won't impact these numbers. What we're doing here is budgeting for ability to partner. What it may impact, if material costs stay at the levels they are right now into perpetuity or for another 2 years, it would affect their ability to do the projects. I'm sure it will. Now, of course, I worked very closely with those developers and others trying to understand what the future material costs look like. And very few people expect it to last forever. So in both of these projects, keep in mind, at the earliest, probably wouldn't start construction until late next fall. And so there is some time for things to normalize somewhat.
Seth, the question I have is, the latest information I have is the construction materials have skyrocketed due to problems in the manufacture of wood components and whatnot due to COVID restrictions. Is that what you're hearing and what you understand?
You know, I really took a deep dive into this recently, Will, and talking with lots of different folks. And actually, what it really comes down to, what most people suggest is it's increased demand. And the timber industry is actually very inelastic. It's difficult to ramp up capacity quickly or ramp down quickly. And going into 2019, there have been a number of years of decreased demand or price at mills specifically, and many of them had actually decreased capacity going into 2020. And in the early months of the COVID pandemic, their estimation was demand's going to drop through the floor. And they actually ramped back further. And the exact opposite happened. One of the many unintended consequences of people being home and looking at what they wanted to do or build or add on or whatever. And it's just drawn demand through the roof, of which capacity and the mills cannot keep up with. And so at this point, we're really in a bottleneck now, driving the supply just cannot keep up with demand currently. And like I said, it's very inelastic as an industry, difficult to ramp up to.
Okay. Councillor Olson, I see your hand.
Yes. When you look at resources at the top of the page, does that reflect any of our ability to borrow money?
Well,
I don't see that it does.
Yes and no, because in order to borrow at favorable rates, you need to have enough reserve cash on hand to be able to service debt if there was a slowdown in TIF revenue or what have you. So as we talk with banks, it's really important that they look at our how leveraged we are with cash to debt. And the more cash you have on hand, the better position you are to acquire debt at a reasonable rate and a reasonable timeline.
So is that cash on hand a fictitious number, or is that the cash that we have on hand?
I'll let Gina speak to that, but that's on hand.
Okay. How much borrowing authority do we have left?
Well, it's really spending authority, whether you borrow it or you just expend TIF revenue that comes through the door, but there's a shade over 21 million.
So we can still borrow 21 million on top of the money that we show here as resources.
We can expend 21 million, including these resources. It's a difference in terminology, but it's really a maximum spending authority, not borrowing authority.
Now, that's not what I understood, well, he wasn't Mr. Tiberius, but Tiberius company guy. He came and gave us, well, we had a report in our agenda, and he asked us if we had any questions. Well, we get it on Saturday and the meeting's on Wednesday, and I hadn't had the time or the goading to study it very thoroughly. I only asked him a couple of questions, but I thought that was one that I asked him. I would like to suggest we get Tiberius back here so we can ask him, because we are at kind of differences of opinion here, let's say. And I think we could get some disinterested, but well, not disinterested, but neutral kind of answers. So I think if we're serious about really finishing up CARA and just plain being done with it, I think we need to have some discussion about
that. Peter, you've got your hand up.
I was raising my hand on behalf of Gina because I thought Gina looked like she had something to say.
Thank you. I did. I just wanted to answer Councillor Olson's question about the resources. I will note that in this last fiscal year, we had community development did a restructuring, and economic development and CARA became part of community development. They left the city manager's office. So what you'll want to do for the current biennium, the 2019-21, is you're going to need to look at both page 9 and page 11 to get the total amount of resources.
We'll just move over this. It's just combined. Let's see, page 9.
So does that reflect borrowing from whoever we borrow from on page 9.
$14 million.
Gina or
Peter or Gina,
Peter?
Peter, your hand's still up.
So we're not, it doesn't really reflect any borrowings. We're currently speaking with our bond counsel about borrowing some monies. You'll see the debt service payments that are reflected in here were from borrowings that happened quite a while ago. The infrastructure loan principal is down here at the bottom. Loan payments and bond debt service payments don't count against the maximum indebtedness. It's only other types of actual expenditures in those urban renewal district or the TIF district.
So we get all done, we get it all borrowed. And at the present time, we've got 6.7 million sitting in a bank or a coffee can someplace. And if we get done in a couple of years, we'll have another, how much? A bunch of money. What do we do then? Do we give it to the general fund? Do we have a party, or what do we do?
So what we would do with that is we would either apply it to debt service to pay off the debt that we have.
Well,
or,
no, we're going to pay that with a TIF. We're not having any problem paying off our debts as we go, according to Tiberius.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
It looks like we're going to have a bunch of cash left over when we're done with this.
I don't think so. I think the intent is to use that cash for this project and the other projects that need to happen.
Well, Tiberius suggested we start giving money back to the school district and the county, which I don't think either one of them either want that much or need that bad. Well, we don't give it back to the school district, we give it to the state for them to redistribute it.
Well, once we complete the projects, then the TIF money that we receive will be used to service the debt that we have. At that point, we can under levy if we choose to do so and return a greater portion to the overlapping taxing districts.
Yeah,
but we're not, but you know, when we get to that point, then that will be a decision that will need to be made, but we're not there yet.
Okay. Mayor Johnson.
I just had one request. I'd like to see this with line item numbers because, you know, I'd like to be able to say line item 7 on page 12, because right now they look so much alike. We're going back and forth. It'd be nice to have line item numbers.
Agreed. But I think it's, shall we push, I guess then the proposal is, I'm hearing from the mayor, is to have the budgeted item, the items on the budget given line numbers so that we can make greater comparisons, and then have that brought back to the committee. Is that what I'm hearing, Mayor?
That's what I would like.
Okay, may I weigh in here?
Yes.
That's going to be a tremendous amount of work for the proposed budget, because you're going to see the same thing in the City of Albany budget this year. I don't know that we would have this completed by Thursday because it is a lot of work. I will tell you, though, that the way that we appropriate the CARA funds is transfers have to be appropriated separately, but everything else is appropriated together. So if you were to approve this budget as is, you would be able to still come back later and make decisions regarding the budget. Not a promising thing to do. It's usually better to go, but it is always an option to make changes in the future. You will have had the funding appropriated, so it can be spent. It would just be a decision on how you would spend it at that point. Again, I wouldn't recommend that, but I also not sure that it would be prudent to wait for line numbers, account numbers to be attached to the documents.
Peter, your hand's up. And
Yes.
then Mayor Johnson, then the mayor.
Yes, Chairman Summers.
I'll take mine down.
This is a lesson we'll take back. I think it's a good idea to have numbers next to line items so you can refer them. But I would urge the committee to resist the temptation to dive down into individual line items. This is actually a simple budget. We've talked about two initiatives. It's the Water Avenue project, which the ARA decided they wanted to do, and the Wells Fargo and the St. Francis, which the ARA decided they wanted to do. That's what's represented by the budget. And if there are no irregularities, or if there are no changes in the budget that need to be made, then the committee can certainly approve it. If there's policy changes that need to be made, as Councilor Smith pointed out, that's probably something that the ARA should take up with the advice of the CARA board.
And make sure I understand this. Passing this budget just gives you the spending authority that the council can revise the budget as necessary moving forward.
With one small correction, and that's the ARA board, not the council.
Okay, the ARA board. Thank you. Councilor Smith, you have your hand up.
I do. And in light of what the city manager just said and the previous decisions made by the ARA regarding the projects that we've just discussed, the Wells building, the St. Francis and the Water Avenue project, I would make a motion to approve the resolution approving the ARA budget for biennium 2021-23 by the Budget Committee and recommending ARA certification to Lynn and Benton County.
This is Jared Taylor. I second.
Second. Yeah.
Jared got in there for a second. I'm going to say all opposed say aye.
Can I ask a question before we?
You want more deliberation? Go ahead, Councilor Olson.
Did I understand the city manager right? That the ARA can modify this budget sometime in the future, hopefully in the near future, if they feel so inclined?
That's what the Budget Committee does, is approve the budget. And as I understand budget law, the legislative body has to adopt the budget. So the legislative body can make changes.
And we would probably do that at a ARA meeting, perhaps?
I'm going to defer to Gina. She's shaking her head up and down.
That's correct. Yeah, at the meeting of the body, the governing body, which would be the ARA, we will ask you to adopt the budget. At that point, the board will be able to make changes.
Okay. Well,
so
as I have indicated, and hopefully not too forcefully, I don't think it's the time to junk CARA. I think there are too many things that still need to be worked on. Mm-hmm. We've got Broad Albany Street. It was called the Broad Albany Promenade to begin with, but the ultra-conservative capitalists made so much fun of it, we dropped that name. And so we've only done half of it. And if you look at that Broad Albany Street, you see 5 different kinds of street lights there, including the much disliked Cobra head lights that we have in large parts of town. And I would very much like to see that Broad Albany Promenade finish up. So I know you're anxious for the question, but I'm going to vote no on approving this budget.
We are also running short on time. Again, I will call for the question and I will say those opposed say aye.
Aye.
Councilor Novak,
Councilor Novak, you're saying something and I can't hear you.
unmute. I didn't realize I'd muted myself. So I just need to understand. So if a no vote would mean that if the budget passes, then we're able to make any modifications to it. I'm with Councillor Olson. I don't want to see Kara sunsetted. But we're not voting to sunset Kara tonight, right?
That is correct.
Approving this budget wouldn't mean sunsetting Kara, because I'm not in favor of sunsetting Kara. If we could make changes to it, if we felt the need to in the future, then you're saying we could do that, sir. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct. Peter, correct me if I am wrong.
Oh, that's correct, Chairman Summers.
All right, thank you.
Okay, so we have the question is still out there. Voting process is still going on. We have 1 against. Any others?
I thought we had 2 against.
2 against. Okay, we have 2 against.
Councilor Novak vote negative. Vote no.
I honestly, if we have an opportunity to make changes down the road, if we feel like we need a change, I kind of feel like everything should be in order. And I'm in the crowd that it would have been helpful to see specific line items. And I don't mean to put more work on staff. I appreciate staff tremendously, and I know budgets are a colossal amount of work, it looks like, but it would be helpful. You said there's no way that you could change that. There's no way you could add numbers, lines, items. Maybe if we ask for that in advance before the next biennium. So, all right, I don't know. I guess, yeah, I'm a little bit leery of voting yes, unless of course it means that we could still make changes.
Peter, you've
Chair Summers.
And
Yes.
there's some others here too. I'm sorry, I can't see your hand quite.
That's Allison Lease, our clerk for tonight.
Okay.
Allison.
Chair Summers, could we take a roll call vote, please? I'm having trouble seeing everybody's face, and sometimes there's a delay in the sound.
Thank you. And would you call a roll call vote on this, Allison?
Yes. Matilda Novak.
Yes, with a degree of reservation.
Dick Olson.
No.
Marilyn Smith.
Yes.
Stacy Bartholomew.
Yes.
Ray Kupczynski.
Yes.
Alex Johnson II.
Yes.
Bessie Johnson.
Yes.
Jesse Brenneman. Jesse Brenneman. Colleen Keller.
Yes.
Keith Losey.
Yes.
Will Summers.
Yes.
Jared Taylor.
Yes.
Terry Vernig.
I'm going to vote yes. I do sympathize with Dick, though.
Chris Hansen.
Yes.
Jesse Brenneman. Okay.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Chair.
So if
Well, I've kept my record intact. I'm still a minority of one.
Okay. With that, the ARA budget for 21-23 passes, and we will forward it on to the ARA board with our recommendation. Now let's take a 5-minute.
Excuse me, can I interrupt for a moment?
You may.
Allison, do we need to specifically call out the taxing rate on the resolution?
What have you done in the past?
I don't know. I don't remember. So normally we have to have the taxing rate approved. I don't know if everybody had a look at the resolution. But
I don't have a copy of the resolution.
I
got
have it.
Agenda, the very back.
I have it. It does not call out the tax rate, but I suspect the authority on that question is Mary Dibble.
That's what I would suspect. And if this is the resolution that you use modeled on the resolution you used last time, then it should be just fine.
okay.
I do not.
I don't see it.
I don't see it in the. I've got
In the packet.
in the packet.
It's page 17, or it's page 12.
I go to page 11.
So
it's not numbered. The resolution is not numbered. It follows page 11.
Okay.
Okay.
And I don't have anything after page 11, which is the biennial budget. So,
page after 11 is blank.
Not in my packet.
Not in my packet. I've got it.
It is in mine.
Councilor Smith, could you read the resolution, please, so we can put it into the minutes?
You betcha. Hang on. I'm getting back there. Okay. A resolution approving the Albany Revitalization Agency budget for biennium 21-23 by the ARA Budget Committee and recommending ARA certification to Lynn and Benton counties. Whereas the biennium 2021-23 ARA budget consists of funding and expenditures for the Central Albany Revitalization Area, CARA, and whereas the ARA Budget Committee conducted a public meeting on May 4, 2021 after proper notice and opportunity for the public to comment. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Albany Revitalization Agency Budget Committee hereby approves the biennium 2021-2023 proposed budget in the amount of $14,415,900. And be it further resolved that the amounts for the biennium beginning July 1, 2021, and for the purpose shown below are hereby appropriated as follows. CARA Urban Renewal District, $13,920,000. Transfers out $495,900. Total $14,415,900. Be it further resolved that the ARA Budget Committee hereby recommends that the ARA certify to the county assessors, Lynn and Benton counties, a request for the ARA plan area for the maximum amount of revenue that may be raised by the Division of Taxes under Section 1C, Article 9 of the Oregon Constitution, and ORS Chapter 457 for each fiscal year of the biennium, dated and effective this 4th day of May, 2021.
Thank you. That is exactly what I needed to happen.
Glad to do it.
Okay, and I apologize, my download did not include that portion. With that, I'm going to, if anybody has anything to go to the order, let it be known now. Otherwise, I'm going to call this adjourn this meeting. Seeing none, meeting is adjourned. Let's take a 10-minute break and get back. Give everybody a chance to get some water. Okay. And Colleen, I have 7:18. I guess it's time we could start again.
You're muted, Colleen.
There you go. And you're unmuted now, Colleen. You're live.
What?
You're live.
We don't do the Pledge of Allegiance?
Well, we just start, if you call the meeting to order, and then we can do the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, I'll call the meeting to order. Okay, Allison, I guess we could do the roll call.
All right. Matilda Novak.
I'm here.
Dick Olson. Dick Olson.
Here.
Marilyn Smith.
Present.
Stacy Bartholomew.
Here.
Ray Kopczynski.
Here.
Alex Johnson II.
Here.
Bessie Johnson.
Here.
Jesse Brenneman.
Here.
Colleen Keller.
Here.
Keith Losey. Keith Losey. Will Summers.
Here.
Jared Taylor.
Here.
Terry Vernig.
Here.
Chris Hansen.
Here.
Keith Losey. Not here yet.
Allison, when you called his name, he was here, but I think he may have dropped off to try to improve his connection.
Oh, okay. So he's here and available. Thank you.
Okay, I guess now we do the election of officers. There's a vacancy for the chairman. Does anybody want to suggest?
Move to nominate Will Summers as chair.
Okay.
Second.
Do I do them all and then ask for? Okay. Okay. Does everybody approve of Will Summers for chair?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Okay. Let's see. And I guess we vote on these others, even though they weren't vacant. Okay. Vice Chairman Colleen Keller.
I would move to appoint Colleen Keller as vice president, as vice chair. Excuse me.
I'll second it.
Okay. All approve, say aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Okay. And Secretary Michael Thompson is that?
He's no
yeah.
longer a member of the committee.
Oh. Okay. Is there anybody that wants to suggest?
I would move to appoint Ray Kopczynski as secretary.
Second.
I will respectfully decline. I don't have any paperwork or any papers to take notes or anything. So
Yeah, I don't know what the secretary does. So I guess we asked Jesse, what did you do?
Why don't we nominate Jesse?
I nominate Jesse Brenneman to be our secretary.
Second.
Everybody approved?
Aye.
Aye.
Anybody objected? Okay. Secretary. Now, who's the new chair? Will?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on. Then it's time for the budget message.
Chairman Summers.
Yes, sir.
I believe we're supposed to go into a public hearing for state shared revenue.
Okay, I scrolled a little too fast. My apologies.
No worries.
Okay, then I open a public hearing for state shared revenues at this time. Do we have anyone in the public who has given testimony and wishes to address the committee?
And we had, and Gina will talk to that, address that. We had received no comment, correct, Gina?
We have received no comment.
And is this?
Let me correct myself. We did have one comment, and that was sent out by email earlier today, right?
Peter,
yeah,
that wasn't for state shared revenue public
hearing.
That's
right. That's correct. Okay.
So, and is there anyone online here who wishes to address the state shared revenue? Seeing none, hearing none, I believe we'll close the public hearing. And is there a script that needs to be read?
No, Chair Summers, that was it. You did all that was necessary. You opened the public hearing, you called for public comment, and you closed the public hearing.
All right. Next time I'll read the whole thing. Okay. We're going to close the public hearing at this time, and it is 7:25 p.m. Okay. So now we go to the approval of minutes for Peter, correct me, are we supposed to approve all these at one time or approve them one at a time?
No, the most efficient thing to do, if nobody has objections to any of them, is to approve all of them at the same time.
Thank you.
I move to approve all the minutes as written one time.
Second.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as presented to the committee. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, the minutes are accepted as presented. Now we go to the budget message. So Peter, please take over.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Summers. And again, congratulations to you. We'll now turn our attention to the city's proposed budget for 2021 to 23 biennium. Department directors and staff have been working on this budget since late 2020 under circumstances we literally have never experienced before. This proposed budget is the product of many dedicated city employees, and it truly is a team effort. But I'd like to specifically single out J.C. Rowley, our finance manager, for the hundreds of hours and countless late days he has put into the effort. I'm going to try to give you a good understanding of our budget environment, and then we'll turn to Gina Yeager, our finance director, to go into a little more detail. When it comes time for questions, department directors will be available to answer those questions. Gina will be available, and I will be available. And here we are. We've got courtesy of Matt Harrington, we've got some nice video footage or not video, but slide footage to go along with this. So as you know, a city budget is more than a complex set of numbers. It communicates how the city government is going to operationalize the council's strategic plan, how the city is going to turn resources into actions. The primary audience is the citizens of the city, but that audience also includes other cities, the state government, bond rating agencies, and others. This budget will be the second biennial budget for the city of Albany. 3 years ago, recognizing the benefits of a 2-year budget, the council decided to transition to a biennial budget process. One of the benefits of a 2-year budget is that it promotes a longer-term approach to budgeting. When that long view is considered, the difference between one-time funds and recurring funds becomes readily apparent. One-time funds such as grant monies, proceeds from the sale of property, infusions from the state or federal government can't be relied upon for continuous revenue. The continued operations of the city must be funded with recurring funds that we can rely upon. When one-time funds are used to fund operations that the citizens demand on a recurring basis, there is a structural problem. The use of those one-time funds in that way makes the structural problem worse in the out years because it masks the problem and delays the corrective action. If we're to live within our means, it's a practice that must be avoided. We have been in this pandemic now for 14 months, and as traumatic and life-changing as the pandemic was, we're grateful for one thing. When it struck, we were midway through our first biennial budget. While other jurisdictions were having to cope with pandemic response and building a budget at the same time, we weren't confronted with that overwhelming combination of events. So as we go on this evening, I'd like you to be mindful of the fact that this budget for the 21-23 biennium reflects the impacts of three important factors. Most importantly, the structural imbalance, the disproportionate increase in the cost of operations as compared to the availability of resources. That's an imbalance that has existed for years. We've talked about it for years, but it's been masked by the use of one-time funds. We're now at a position where we're forced to make significant cuts in service levels. The negative impacts, the second thing is the negative impacts of the pandemic, which have already forced changes in parks and recreation, in the municipal court, and in those functions that are funded by transient lodging tax revenue. And then the third thing is the infusion of federal assistance in the form of one-time funds provided by the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, the CARES Act, and coming soon, the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. The League of Oregon Cities has recognized that Oregon's property tax system is in dire need of reform, and they've made that reform one of their 7 legislative priorities for 2021. As the League notes, with the passage of the corporate activities tax, Oregon has taken a step toward long-term financial stability at the state and school district level, but local budgetary challenges persist. And the legislature must take action to allow cities and other local governments to adequately fund the services that residents demand. The structural problem is simple. Measures 5, 47, and 50 from the 1990s have limited property tax revenue growth to 3% annually, while the costs of operations increase annually at significantly higher rates. This is a problem for all municipal operations that rely on property tax revenues as a funding source, specifically public safety, the municipal court, parks and recreation, planning, and library services. We have long known that the trend is unsustainable and that it forces reductions in service levels. To avoid those reductions or to minimize them, city departments have decreased or eliminated contributions to their equipment replacement funds over the last few budget cycles. Unfortunately, those accounts have been drawn down to levels that can't support further reductions. Without additional sources of revenue, there is no alternative but to adjust service levels downward in the next biennium. Some of those adjustments have already been made as we've tried to prepare for that eventuality. The structural problem will continue to shrink service levels until the property tax system is reformed or the city decides to create an alternative revenue source. The pandemic and the associated economic shutdowns and restrictions changed so much around us. The city's twin goals during the first stages of the pandemic and continuing through into the next biennium were and are to maintain continuity of service and to protect the health and safety of city staff and the people we serve. Drastic adjustments in our business practices were required by the governor's orders and Oregon Health Authority and Occupational Safety and Health Administration guidelines. Certain types of revenue were immediately hit hard as travel came to a standstill and people were no longer able to congregate for concerts, classes, and special events. The transit system suffered an immediate and severe loss of ridership. Extraordinary expenditures were required in several areas as city facilities implemented precautionary public health measures for citizens and staff alike, and employees were provided extended teleworking opportunities to help reduce the risk of virus spread. These were unplanned expenditures. Some welcome relief came in the form of CARES Act funding, with which we were able to invest in the protection of our people using funds that were available for leave, overtime, and telecommuting equipment. We took advantage of technologies to enable working from home. And looking forward, the city has embraced this capability as it'll position us well to handle subsequent waves or another pandemic, God forbid, and which also hold promise for helping employees improve work-life balance or cope with closures of daycare facilities and schools, while continuing to provide the essential services required by the community. Activation of the city's Emergency Operations Center during the first stages of the pandemic helped to ensure continuity of operations and a rapid response to a very changed environment. In the months that followed, public access to City Hall was restricted, but operations never ceased during the pandemic. It's worth noting that because Oregon cities do not have sales taxes, the negative revenue impacts on city governments in Oregon were felt mostly by parks and recreation departments and activities that are reliant upon transient lodging tax revenues. Property taxes and state shared revenues were not immediately impacted, and the subsequent effects on these sources of revenue remain to be seen. This is a very descriptive graph in which you can see the impacts on TLT and parks revenue in blue and green against a backdrop of the gray bars indicating property tax revenue. Before the pandemic struck in March of 2020, unemployment rates had been at historic lows and the economy was booming. There were indications that the economy would have continued its positive trajectory. Instead, the pandemic-induced shutdown caused many to suffer. And although the recovery is well underway, it is proceeding unevenly, with small businesses and many of their employees suffering disproportionately. PERS payments, employee insurance, infrastructure contracts, materials, and other costs are all expected to rise, and costly unfunded mandates continue to contribute to the problem. The PERS problem is well known. There is a light at the end of the PERS tunnel, but it's not until the 2025-2027 biennium when the burden of supporting the PERS fund is expected to begin to decrease. The city is a service organization, and service is provided through people. What this generally means is that the only way in which we can operate within the property tax constraints described earlier is by reducing FTE, full-time equivalency. So this budget necessarily incorporates FTE reductions. It's very tempting to look at reserves to fund operations. And indeed, this was how the city came through the last recession. It had a healthy reserve. But those reserves have been drawn down. We've been unable to build them back up over the last 2 budget cycles. So I feel compelled to remind committee members about the relationship of reserves to our bond rating, which directly affects the cost of borrowing money. The stronger our reserves, the better our bond rating. The better our bond rating, the less we pay in debt service. There's a direct parallel to personal credit ratings. The better the credit rating, the better the terms of the loan, including interest rates and ease of application. The worse the credit, the worse the terms. In mid-December of 2020, Moody's, in their periodic rating of cities, noted that the credit position for Albany is sound, and its AA3 rating is on par with US cities median of AA3. Key credit factors include an adequate but below average financial position, an ample tax base, and a healthy wealth and income profile. It also reflects an extremely small debt burden and a somewhat elevated pension liability. The city has a sound position, financial position, which is relatively favorable in comparison to the assigned rating of AA3. However, Albany's cash balance as a percent of operating revenues is slightly lower than the US median, and it declined between 2015 and 2019. Also, the fund balance as a percent of operating revenues is under the US median. And the italics and bold is added, I've added that. The Moody's report went on to note that the economy and tax base of the city are quite healthy and are comparable to its AA3 rating. Albany's full value per capita is roughly equivalent to the US median and saw a material growth from 2015 to 2019. The median family income is 93% of the US level. And in an implied warning, they noted that the continued imbalance will potentially lead to a lowering of our bond rating. Also important, but less prominent as we look at this budget, are the diminished levels of our equipment replacement accounts. These accounts used to save for equipment purchases have been depleted as we've tried to maintain service levels, and they can no longer be used to stave off personnel cuts. We often note that people are our most important resource, and they certainly are. As I mentioned earlier, this is a service organization, and it depends on people to provide those services. But if those people aren't properly equipped, we're doing them and our community a disservice. In this biennium, equipment replacement funds show an 8% decrease in reserves. But total reserves are increasing. Departments are preparing for an uncertain future by reevaluating priorities and making cuts to improve positions in future biennia. The Parks and Recreation Department has increased reserves in each of its operating programs to help those programs weather the projected long-lasting impacts of COVID-19. The largest increase is in capital reserves as departments opt for a pay-as-you-go approach to future investment needs, as opposed to a more expensive and a charter-restricted debt issuance. The American Rescue Plan Act, we mentioned earlier, passed in March of 2021, will provide state and local governments across the country with funds to be used for recovery from the effects of the pandemic. There is much that remains unclear as I wrote this, but we expect that the City of Albany will receive approximately $9.3 million in one-time funding. A careful evaluation of potential uses of these one-time funds is underway and will involve extensive community outreach, and ultimately, Council will review the results of the community evaluation and provide their own input and then their approval. We need to talk a little bit about risk. Risk is inherent in life, and a certain level of risk is accepted every day and in everything we do. But risk is hard to quantify. What we can say is that the structural imbalance described above contributes to increases in risk. Revenue constraints guarantee that the budget is limited in its growth, while public demands for service are not limited. The resulting erosion of service levels is slow and insidious. As cost increases outpace the availability of resources, services have to be scaled back. This year, due to a lack of resources available for training, the fire department suspended its dive rescue capability. This capability was used infrequently enough that its continued support couldn't be justified against higher priorities and the fact that the capability was available from other jurisdictions. But you can see that this raises risk, a small amount. And because of the structural imbalance, we are soon thereafter forced to look at the next function to be cut. As the imbalance continues, this budget will eliminate Medic 71, our single role paramedic capability. The impact of cuts in public-facing departments is obvious. Less obvious is the impact of cuts in central services. Demands for support from the city's central services function also continue to grow. Increasing levels of support are required from information technology, finance, and human resources. But the resources to pay for those services are severely limited. This leads to the acceptance of higher levels of risk. Risk of non-compliance with law or best practice, risk of procedural error, risk of tort action, risk of decreased employee retention, etc. It's tempting to say, do more with less. And I assure you that we as public servants take stewardship responsibilities very seriously. City employees are devoted to their mission and are continually looking for ways to economize and to prioritize. However, doing more with less has very practical limits as the list of mandates and regulations continues to grow. The negative effects of a downward trend in FTE are not easily perceptible or immediately measurable, but at some point, the decision must be made to not do something due to limited staff resources. As an example, not having sufficient staff available in the finance department means the loss of the ability to produce a robust, comprehensive annual financial report. This in turn has a negative effect on bond ratings and consequently on the cost of borrowing for capital projects. Staffing shortages in human resources may jeopardize compliance with labor laws, which in turn increases the risk of lawsuits. Cybersecurity risks increase exponentially as IT staffing levels don't meet increased demand. According to a recent story published in InfoSecurity magazine, 44% of global ransomware attacks that took place in 2020 were aimed at local governments. These attacks are on the rise and are forcing IT to redirect staffing resources toward deterrent efforts. Decreases in resources available for training and education have a deleterious effect on proficiency, which creates its own risk, but they also have a negative effect on retention. The training and education of staff is an investment which pays off in professionalism and job satisfaction. Failing to make that personnel investment increases the risk of losing trained and qualified staff and deteriorating the professional knowledge and competence of our workforce. Deferred maintenance brings its own risks. While those risks are also difficult to quantify, we know that they equate to an increase in future costs. We can't afford to do it today, so we'll get to it when we can. That's a common approach to triaging urgent current needs. However, when we fail to maintain physical assets today, that serves only to accelerate their aging and their deterioration. This in turn increases the costs of repair in the out years. Reserve balances intended for future maintenance will be inadequate for the liabilities of tomorrow. Looking into the future to anticipate the city's needs and to plan for its growth is an essential responsibility of the City Council and city staff. In the fall of this year, a comprehensive update of the city's strategic plan will be initiated, and the plan will be revised in time to inform the development of the 2023 to 25 budget. For this budget, the existing strategic plan informs our planning. So in closing, let me recap. General fund reserves have been depleted over the last several budget cycles. But with the last budget and continuing into this budget, reserves are being replenished. The city weathered the last recession largely because it had a substantial reserve. Fiscal responsibility dictates that we try hard to restore our reserves and our ability to withstand a similar economic downturn. Property tax revenues are limited by state law. The council has no control over property tax and is therefore being forced to consider a city services fee, which would supplement property tax revenue to maintain and sustain levels of service within the general fund. As we talk tonight, council has provided direction with respect to the construction of a city services fee and the distribution of the burden that it would place on the city's residents. However, the council has not committed to implementing that fee. Consequently, this budget is submitted without that revenue source. I have talked almost exclusively about the general fund. Within the city's enterprise funds, revenues come primarily from the ratepayers who pay for the quantity of the water and wastewater services they use. Ratepayers also pay for stormwater services using a carefully developed formula. And like general fund functions, these functions are not immune to pressure from increasing costs. They experience the same pressure that the general fund experiences. The difference is that the council has much greater control over revenues. The council annually reviews rates and makes decisions based on the need to invest in the maintenance of the systems and the need to comply with increasing regulation. But we can't lose sight of the fact that we're falling behind in street maintenance and that there are significant large projects on the horizon as development occurs east of I-5, stressing our water and wastewater systems. Albany is growing and will continue to grow, according to projections from Portland State University. Revenue is also growing, but not at the same rate as demands for general fund services. The city is not broke, to dispel some of the talk I've heard. However, the city and I am required to present you with a balanced budget to the council. With projected revenues, we're unable to maintain current service levels and keep pace with the needs of our growing community. An additional $5 million would be needed for the 21 to 23 biennium to maintain that level of service in public safety, parks, library, and other community services. The Oregon tax limitation measures of the 90s capped property tax revenue, as we discussed earlier. This was welcomed by taxpayers. However, taxpayers are beginning to understand that as a result, the city's budget has not kept pace with rising costs associated with inflation, market-driven increases in labor, goods, and services, and unfunded mandates imposed by the federal and state governments. Today, property taxes fund only a fraction of existing services. Consequently, this budget makes substantial cuts in service. A city services fee, if implemented by the council, will help retain and or restore services. Because of the statewide inadequacy of the property tax system to fund those services, over 50 Oregon cities use such fees to help pay for such services. In Albany, that fee would be collected through the city utility bills based on the type of account, not based on property value, and would incorporate a low-income assistance program to aid residents whose household incomes fall below a designated percentage of the median income. At this writing, the council is not committed to implementation, but we're proceeding, aligning our services with the funding that we know will be available. With a $5 million shortfall over the biennium, this budget will provide direction for reducing city services in municipal court, library, police, fire, and parks and recreation, as layoffs of personnel and reductions in opening hours will be unavoidable. Okay, we really are at the end, for me anyway. Service, my watchwords are service, stewardship, and integrity. We take pride in the service the city provides, and we're dedicated to excellence and stewardship of the city's resources. We strive to maintain the high levels of integrity upon which that service and stewardship rest. And I'm very grateful for this team and for you and your service in reviewing this proposed budget. Thank you for the opportunity to talk with you this evening. And at this point, Chairman Summers, I think I'll turn it back over to you for the rest of the agenda.
Thank you, Peter. The next item on the agenda is a budget overview, and we'll turn to Finance Director Gina Yeager. I hope I pronounced that correctly, Gina, for a review of the budget.
You did pronounce it correctly. Thank you. I just wanted, normally we meet with the budget committee before our first budget committee meeting, the official one, and we really didn't have an opportunity to do that this year, partly due to COVID, partly because of other priorities. So I wanted to give a brief budget overview to those of you who are new and maybe even to those of you who have been around for a while. Again, as Peter said, putting this budget together is a lot of work, and most of that work fell on the shoulders of JC Rowley, our finance manager. However, the rest of the finance staff, as well as city manager's office and IT and frankly, all the departments in the city really pulled together so that we could have the information to present this proposed budget to you. I am going to attempt to share my screen. Oh, let's do this one. Uh-oh.
See the proposed budget, Gina.
You can see it? Okay, I don't see it on that screen. So it just gave me a notice about my Zoom to join a meeting. So I'm not sure what's happening, but anyway. So the first thing I wanted to show you, this is the document that we have available online. There is bookmarks over on the side. There are bookmarks. The first thing that I really want to get into is the introductory section. So if you open that up, we have the introductory section, which includes our mission, our vision, the budget committee, the City of Albany budget process. And that's really the first thing that we are going to talk about. So the way we budget, according to our financial policy, is that we need to align the budget with the strategic plan. Peter had mentioned that earlier, and that's what we do. We estimate conservatively, and we avoid using one-time monies for ongoing operations. We really need to have sustainable resources in order to fund our operations. The general fund, for those of you who don't really know our different fund structures, is non-dedicated revenues. This is the majority of our property taxes. We can use these monies for almost anything. Having said that, we do have other types of revenues in the general fund, including fines, fees, ambulance revenues. We have agreements with other governments, intergovernmental agreements for fire protection services, GAPS coverage, as well as some other minor resources. What we do is we prepare a 5-year forecast using the assumptions in the January timeframe. We'll talk about the assumptions in a few minutes, but really we base this on current economic factors. We look at what the market's doing, we look at construction, we look at building permits, and we try to come up with a reasonable, conservative estimate of what our revenues are going to look like. Once we have those revenues, we will back out expenditures that are pass-throughs to other governmental agencies, for example, or I'm sorry, actually we don't do that in this one. We will have transfers out of the different programs. We back those out. We back out our contingency. Our financial policy calls for a contingency that is 5 to 15% of our operating revenue. So in the general fund, we'll back that out. Remaining revenues, we allocate based on a methodology. The ones we've used in the past and including this year was on what the percentage was for the prior biennium. However, even though that is a general approach we take, we are able to make adjustments at the direction of the city manager. So for example, in this year's budget, we are no longer getting jail services through Lynn County. And in order to contract with the city of Lebanon, we needed to have funding available to pay for those jail beds. So if municipal court didn't receive extra funding for that purpose, we probably would have had to cut a position. So we can make adjustments as necessary. So then going on to the special revenue funds, these funds have revenues that are either committed or restricted, to use some GFOA fancy accounting language, or they can also be assigned. But these are ones that have certain things such as state gas tax that can only be used for street funds. So we have a special revenue fund for streets. We have one for parks and recreation, which rely heavily on charges for service, as well as some property tax funding. We have intergovernmental agreements. Currently, we're running Maple Lawn, and we are being funded by GAPS when we move forward with that once again after the pandemic. Building inspection receives permits and building fees. those revenues can only be used for building inspection type activities. They cannot be used for anything else. Risk management currently transfers in are the primary source of revenue, and it's to cover litigation. The CH2M Hill litigation is there. Our sewer department will transfer funds in as they are being used. The other thing that we need to do is we also have a PERS reserve in there to help smooth future PERS rates, and a general catastrophic reserve. So economic development relies on TLT funding. The Economic Opportunity Development Fund received the remainder of what was once referred to as the Pepsi settlement funds. Transit receives intergovernmental funds. They receive a lot of funding from FTA. There's also the new state transportation improvement fund monies that we receive from as a pass through the county from the state. The public safety levy fund is used mainly for tracking purposes. It's where we record all the revenues that we receive for the local option levy from the county through our property tax distributions. Capital replacement, this is reliant on contributions from departments for future equipment replacement needs. And then, as I mentioned earlier, streets is reliant on gas tax, as well as some additional smaller funding, but really they don't have a lot of revenues that allow them to do the things they need to do. Debt service is yet another type of fund, and that is exactly what it sounds like. It's to allocate monies either received from departments or from a general obligation bond, which is financed by property taxes. And it's just to show the principal and interest payments for that debt service. We also have permanent funds, which are our trust funds. Currently, we have 2 programs in the library trust, which we've received endowments, and we can only spend the interest on those endowments. We have a capital projects fund. Oops, which I think I may have skipped over.
You did.
I did. So the capital projects fund is used for city capital projects. For example, one of the last projects we had in there was the Munis implementation. We also had the public safety facilities building in that fund. You're not going to see enterprise funds in here. Those are going to be in their individual water, sewer, stormwater funds. So enterprise funds, those are, as I just mentioned, the water, sewer, stormwater. Those are rate driven and are also reliant upon SDCs. Finally, we have internal service funds, and these funds account for services that are furnished by one city department to other city departments. These are sometimes referred to as overhead, but being part of the central services department, I believe that we provide a much needed service to the city. And we have 2 different programs within that. We have central services, which includes programs like finance and IT, city manager's office, HR. And then we also have one for public works, where public works departments and programs will charge back to this fee for certain activities like engineering and some of the different planning type activities. Sorry, I'm just finding my place. We also include public maintenance in our central services. It was a change that we made in the last few years. We decided that because they perform citywide services to all departments, that we would track them there, and it would give more visibility and also provide them with the same type of funding that other central service funds get. So some of the assumptions are on page 37 of the budget. Well, I'm just scrolling too fast. I apologize. Let me come up here and do this. Okay. So the assumptions that we used to build our budget this year were property taxes would have a 3% increase in assessed value. Our health insurance costs would go up depending on the bargaining unit, either 4 or 5% in the first year. And then we're estimating a 10 to 15% increase in the second. Our PERS is staying steady at 33%, and COLAs, which are based on bargaining unit contracts, were budgeted at 2% in the first year and 1% in the second. That is subject to change as we go through negotiations with different bargaining units. The next thing I just wanted to draw attention to is the fund summaries. The fund summaries are something that we did new this year. We are taking we're taking the funds and we're talking about the resources, we're talking about the requirements of those funds, and then we are also talking about opportunities and challenges in each of those funds. And then we have the revenues and expenditures or resources and requirements listed. Each of these funds have to be balanced in order for us to budget this appropriately, and you'll find that they are. So if you're looking at the general fund, the majority of the fund resources come in the form of property taxes, but we also have franchise fees, privilege taxes, intergovernmental agreements, and other types of revenue. The opportunities and challenge in the general fund, as Peter mentioned, is it's personnel driven. People are getting more expensive and revenues are not keeping pace with that. We are subject to all sorts of, bargaining units. We're subject to just cost of living in general. We're subject to the health insurance increases, PERS increases. We're subject to all of these things that just go into making our personnel cost more. And again, revenues are not keeping up with that. There is definitely an imbalance there. So then into parks and recreation, they have charges for service and property taxes as their major funding sources. They were hit very hard by COVID. They had to discontinue programs. We weren't seeing the same amounts of revenue, although we are hoping that we can possibly get some ARPA funds to help backfill some of those revenues. We recognize that those one-time funds from ARPA are not going to be used for operating expenses because we just wouldn't be able to sustain those in the future. So Parks has done a really great job of restructuring and really taking a look at what their programs are. They have discontinued their sports program, and there may be other service level increases. One item I heard is that maybe there's going to be one less River Rhythm concert this year. Grants get a variety of funding sources. There can be intergovernmental funding. Some of the grant funds we use for tracking purposes. This is where we currently have the ARPA funds budgeted. Because we don't know yet on what we can spend that money on, but we know we're receiving it, we have to budget for it. So it's currently in a grant fund and it's budgeted in a reserve. And then there are some transfers because some of it may be used for a revenue backfill. And then other expenditures we would just keep within that program. At this point though, again, we don't have direction from Treasury. We're still waiting on that, hoping for that next week. Once we do get that direction, Peter will put together an advisory committee to help evaluate where we should put those funds. Building inspection has been doing pretty well the last few years. They've been able to leverage technology to reduce the number of staff required to do the job. They have also maintained healthy reserves. Again, I just want to caution you that building funds can only be used for building related activities. They can't use this money for anything else. Risk management, as I talked about, the biggest challenge for us here is that the city's financial policy calls for a catastrophic reserve in the risk management fund to total $2 million. We're not there. At this point, we're just above $1 million in this budget cycle. We are going to need to really look into how we can fund this because the returns on investment are just not cutting it for us. We have started putting other funds in here or other reserves, like I mentioned, the PERS reserve to help smooth out PERS rate increases in the future, and the CH2M Hill reserve that is used by the sewer department. Economic development has seen some struggles. TLT revenues have been down during the pandemic. And so there may be some ARPA funds available for that. Again, it needs to be determined by the advisory board that will be put together. Also in this program is the Economic Opportunity Development Fund, which holds the remaining funds from the Pepsi settlement funds. Public transit receives a majority of its funding from the federal government. We also receive, as I mentioned, the STIF funds. The big item on public transit's horizon is the need for a bus barn or a transit operations facility. We do receive STIF funding that we can use to enhance our routes. So that's one of the things that Director Chris Bailey has mentioned at a recent council meeting is the expansion of routes in the city that can be funded with those STIF funds. The public safety levy, again, that's where we account for funds that we receive from the local option levy through property taxes. Basically, they're doing pretty well right now. You know, tax revenues are coming in higher than we had anticipated, but it looks like compression is also starting to rear its ugly head again. So it wouldn't surprise me in the next few biennia if compression starts approaching levels that we saw back in the 2012, 2013 timeframe. Capital replacement, these are equipment replacement funds. This is where we used to track all of that. One of the things that I'll discuss just a few minutes is how some of the changes we've made in the budget, and this is one of those. Capital replacement, as Peter mentioned, we've depleted those reserves. We're still down slightly this biennium, but part of the process that we changed is really doing a longer term forecasting on what each department's needs are going to be, and then developing a plan to start funding those. So, you know, we don't get 10 years out and all of a sudden we need, I know, a new UNIS or a new, ERP for the city. We'll be able to fund that without having to worry about where those monies are going to come from. Streets is seeing some big issues. Part of the problem is that they just don't have enough money for routine maintenance. And unfortunately, putting that maintenance off is only going to raise the cost in the future. So this is something that they are, some sort of funding mechanism is will have to be come up with for that. One of the opportunities is to possibly replace existing streetlights with LEDs, which could save us up to $100,000 a year. Debt service, the opportunities there, there's really not a whole lot of opportunities or challenges in the debt service programs. These come from either department transfers in, but most of those are coming close to an end. And the debt service for general obligation bonds will be around for a while, but those are based on taxes, and those are outside the limitations of measures 547 and 50. There's that general obligation debt service. And capital projects, again, this is where we had our Munis, our ERP system was and is in here currently as we finish that up. The city public safety facility buildings were also in this capital projects fund. Other things that have been there in the past have been local improvement districts. And, you know, depending on where we're headed with development, that may be something that happens again. At this point, you know, nothing is planned. The library trust, one of the things for them is investment interest is not doing so well right now. Director Eichenoy is considering moving these monies to the Oregon Community Foundation so that they can, economies of scale, basically, they can be lumped together with other funding that we receive from them. But that is currently in the works, but it hasn't happened yet. And then sewer. Sewer is one of their accomplishments is they've implemented a comprehensive pipe asset management system. It's been created. They identify pipes that they need to replace and are doing the worst ones first. The costs associated with the cannibal treatment plant failure are still being absorbed by sewer as we go along. They're also going to be working with the DEQ on the discharge permit renewal, and they need to replace and expand major components of the sewer collection system. Water also is facing some issues. So the rates only cover minimal, they are struggling to maintain services and complete projects without increasing rates too much. As Peter mentioned, it's always a concern. They're seeing the same types of personnel costs that we are, and rate increases are necessary, but they're trying to temper those as much as they can. There will be a water master plan update coming soon. And they want to create a program of targeted and strategic investment of capital funds. One of the things Director Bailey had mentioned is that rather than issuing debt for some of these projects, she would like to build the funds and pay as we go, which as a finance director, I admire. So, and then the Stormwater Fund. Currently, rates only cover minimal operation and maintenance programs in compliance with the MS4 permit. They also need a stormwater master plan update, and the rates may be increasing. I believe they have come forward and we'll be discussing that at a future council meeting. Central service charges. So this year, central services wanted to align with the restrictions in the general fund and parks. So all of the directors took a very hard look at their departments and did a zero-based budget. We were able to come up with budgets that overall in central services was a decrease from the prior biennium. Funding may have been moved around a little bit between the different central services departments, but we are pretty happy with this. However, future biennia, we see the same issues with personnel costs rising as other departments in the city. And it is going to be a struggle to keep FTE and keep our levels of service. As Peter mentioned earlier, there is risk associated with not being staffed appropriately. And then the public works central services, again, they're seeing, personnel issues too. They're primarily personnel, and they're seeing the same types of issues that every other department in the city is seeing. So after that, there are the department summaries. I'm not going to go through all of these with you. You've had this document. Basically, each department provided an overview of what they do, their strategic goals and objectives, and how they meet those in the strategic plan. We have performance measures and workload indicators. You probably remember these from each of the program narratives in the older budgets. And then we have a budget summary, which is all the requirements in our department. We don't have revenues in here because revenue sources could come from a variety of funds. We have the organizational chart, and then we have the different functional areas. So in finance, we have municipal court, we have oversight over a number of city funds and programs such as debt service, public safety levy, risk management. So all of those will be called out here. There was a question about non-operating, and non-operating programs are going to be those that are not used for ongoing operations or operating expenses. So in this case, it's going to be IT equipment replacement, finance IT equipment replacement, other equipment replacement funds. It could be capital, it could be debt service. And then we have line item detail at the end of each of these department summaries. So as we go along, we have a lot in finance that we do. But anyway, as I said, I'm not going to go through each of those individually. It would just take too long, and hopefully you've had a chance to review those on your own before this meeting. The next piece is the appendix, and in the appendix you're going to find information about our financial policies, our risk management, our investment policies. You're going to find the strategic plan. You're going to find the CIP document. You're going to find a glossary, and you're going to find a glossary of acronyms. Because as you probably know, we in government love to use acronyms. So if you ever have and hopefully we've called them out, but if you ever have a question, feel free to go back here and you can see what it is. So that is the budget document. I just want to briefly go over some of the key changes to the budget. One of the things that we did this year for this budget cycle is we really wanted to determine the best way of budgeting and what made sense. So one of the things you'll notice is that employee paid benefits, there's a big decrease in that line item, but you're going to see increases in other lines, or actually where it was zero before. We're calling out vision, medical, PERS, all those different types of workers, employer paid benefits that used to be lumped together, we're now calling out. It provides us with better tracking. It is much easier to do costing for those items if we have them budgeted individually. And it gives people an idea of what those benefits are. For example, the PERS. One of the other things we did is we moved code enforcement, and we moved the emergency manager into their own programs in the central service fund. The code manager is in police. He still reports to police. The emergency manager was in the city manager's office. We moved him into his own program, and he still will report to fire. We also have programs associated with code enforcement so that monies that we expend on derelict properties and monies we receive for derelict properties will be tracked in one program. So those funds can be used to further the work. We just thought that really increased the visibility. People aren't thinking that we're just finding people in order to fund our people. That's not what we're doing it. We're trying to use it to clean up other properties. And that was the intent of moving that. Equipment replacement, as I mentioned, equipment replacement, we used to have everything in a capital equipment line or a fund, and we've broken that out. So it goes into individual programs, so departments can track their own equipment replacement monies easier. Some of them have been moved to the individual funds, like most of the public works equipment replacement have been moved to those funds. And then we have governmental ones that are still being tracked in that equipment or capital replacement fund. And then another item that we changed with central services, we instituted an administration program. There are certain costs to central services, such as audit services, software, servers, those types of expenses that we would have to have whether or not the department existed. State law requires that we have audit services. If we didn't have a finance department, you'd still have to have audit services. So we moved those types of expenses into the administration program. We also put the city hall rental fees in there, and just thought maybe it would be better than having to have those in the individual departments, which are affecting, you know, what those departments can do for their staffing levels. IT resources used to have dedicated funds. Our former deputy city manager funds went over to IT for his duties. We got rid of the dedicated revenues in IT. So now they're part of the central services revenues program. So it's no longer dedicated. But I'll also point out that we have separately, we've broken out all of those different central service charges. Instead of having one lump sum of administrative charges, we now have finance charges and HR charges and IT charges, et cetera. Again, for transparency, for clarity, and for tracking purposes. In the transit department, we are receiving the state transportation improvement funds. And in order to track that, we have new STIF programs in each of the transit that go along with each of the transit programs. So, for example, if the Albany Transit Program is going to use STIF funds to expand their service, they're going to charge that STIF program for that monies. So you may see a big increase in the charges for service in the transit regular programs, but that's because they're charging these STIF programs. You'll also see an increase because we are planning to expand services, as Director Bailey had mentioned. During this last year, community development did a big reorganization. As a result of that, the CD now has a dedicated director, and also, oops, I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to turn this on because I can't see my notes. And then also community economic development and the CARA program are both reporting to community development. We felt that was a good alignment, and so they have been moved there. So in some of these different programs, you may see, as we saw in the ARA budget, that there are two different sheets for the same program because they have just moved to a different department. City manager's office used to be, economic development and CARA used to be under the city manager's office. Now it's under community development. And then the other thing we did is we did a reevaluation of central service methodologies this year. We wanted to really take a look and see what we were basing budgeted numbers on. And so, for example, we've moved it now to, for example, our AP piece. My AP person is now, we budget according to the number of invoices that she processes for departments. And HR is based on number of FTE. Risk manager is based on number of FTE. Something like code enforcement is going to be based on the departments that use those services. So we really looked at each of those and then came up with a new methodology and are using that this year. So lots of changes to the budget, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Oh, actually, I just wanted to really briefly, I promise it'll be brief, talk about some of the questions that we had come up that I sent out just for public knowledge. So there was a question about the resources in the IT program. And as I mentioned, we moved all of those to the central services revenue. So no dedicated revenues anymore. The employer paid benefits, we broke those out into individual benefits. There was a question about the non-medical Medicaid grant for public works. And so I reached out to our transit department and they said the city receives funds from ODOT for eligible rides. Eligibility is determined by the state SPD office, senior and people with disabilities, and our local council of governments, senior and disabled services. They approve whether a person is eligible or not, and it's primarily an income-based determination that's subject to change. We haven't really provided those rides recently, so the budgeted amounts are relatively small. We're just preparing to be able to expend that if we need to. And then, as I mentioned, non-operating programs are going to be for programs that are not part of normal operations. It's going to be equipment replacement, IT equipment replacement. It will be grants, not grants, I'm sorry. It'll be debt service. It will be capital projects. And then the question regarding charges for service in public transit. And again, we implemented those new STIF projects, programs, and charging back those. And then the same high dollar amount for mayor council and dropping for the next biennium. So with those, one of the things we did as part of our central services budgeting this year is we eliminated central service charges to other central service programs. We were basically artificially inflating the amount of charges that we were charging departments, so we decided not to do that. The other thing that we did is insurance and bonds are not really relevant to mayor and council, and so we moved those to our newly formed administration program in central services. Again, if you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to me and Peter either tonight, you can certainly mention it, or also if you have questions that you want to email to us, we certainly appreciate that as well. And I am done. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Gina?
Yes.
3 quick questions.
Okay.
Page 63 on risk management, you talk about it calls for a catastrophic reserve in risk management to total $2 million.
Yes.
And you went over that just a little bit. I didn't see anything indicating on the actual item list that indicated catastrophic reserve of any kind. So where would that be found?
Yeah, so that one is not actually called catastrophic reserve in that program. That's what the intent of it is just called the risk management reserve. And it's just over $1 million for this current budget.
The risk man, okay.
Chair Summers?
Yes.
I still have 2 more questions.
Oh, okay. Chair,
Okay.
let Ray finish and then I'll.
Then go to page 69 with the public safety levy. You talk about a beginning balance reserve that hopefully mitigates any COVID, a $500,000 transfer reserve will combat revenue shortfalls. And is that on, I don't see any of that listed on page 70, or am I just missing it?
So the $500,000 transfer is happening this fiscal year.
Okay.
We are also going to establish a reserve so that if in the future, as some of you may know, the first property tax district to be hit with compression is the local option levy.
Okay,
So this would help.
You're calling that under the beginning reserve.
And so that will be beginning.
500,000?
That would be the beginning reserve.
The beginning. Well, you said beginning balance for resources, but so it's not.
It's the beginning. It's the beginning. It's the beginning balance, and then
It's not. But it's not there. We haven't started it yet, so it's not there.
It will be there. It will be there going into this budget cycle.
Into the budget cycle. Okay.
It'll be going. Yeah, it will be there when we go into this budget cycle.
The last question I have is on page 77 under opportunities, challenges for the general obligation debt service. You said some of the items could be result in property tax revenue requests to the county less than required obligations. Can you give me an example of that?
So one of the debt service is an odd thing. So our schedule for debt service payment can vary. It can go up and down. You would think that maybe it would be a straight line amortization, but it's not. And so we may have a year where we don't need as much debt service from the county. And this could help weather that. The other piece of that is, if we don't receive all the funding that we need, then this could help weather that also. We're doing at 25% of the current obligations. And we'll keep checking it. So far, we've never had a problem getting the funding that we need. But again, with the way that debt service, I'd be happy to show anybody if you're interested in what our repayment schedule looks like. But sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. They have individual interest rates for each of the years, which is also interesting. So that's really just to maintain. We'd like to kind of maintain, what we're requesting from the county so that people don't see a sudden drop and then come back up again. And so this would help us do that.
Thank you.
Terry?
Yeah, I've got one of these questions dovetails on what Chairman Summers already talked about, and that is, I'm going to use an example. If we had an officer required or enabled shooting, for instance, and there was a big civil lawsuit associated with that, where would the cost of that come out of? Do we have insurance that covers that? And if we do have insurance, I couldn't see, it probably stands out somewhere in here, but I couldn't see where it was.
So it's going to fall under insurance and bonds. So our insurance provider, City County Insurances, handles those types of claims for us, all our tort claims. And we are covered under those policies. But the premiums for those will show up under insurance and bonds in each of the individual programs.
How large is that coverage then from something like that?
I would need to double check that. It's fairly substantial. We have $125,000 deductible. And I believe I would need to check into that, but I can certainly get that document. Did you just pull it up?
I just saw it. I'm an insurance guy, so I looked at that first. So.
Okay.
Let me take a look. I just saw and I had a question about it myself. Let me find it. I'll just email my question, but I looked at I think it was $50 million or $10 million for something like that, tort claims.
Okay.
I can have that information for you at the next budget committee meeting.
Right. The other question I had is more of an interest one, and that is, Peter mentioned actually the PERS fund 2025 to 27. It was going to start easing off. What is the trigger there? What's happening that's going to help us PERS wise? Because I've been in this stuff for a long time, and PERS has been a bugaboo for the whole time. So how are we going to get helped by?
They did basically a refinancing. So it's like when you refinance your mortgage, they refinanced PERS. And so I will tell you that the decline is very, very small. It is tiny. And so it's, you know, it's coming, it's in the right direction, but it's not anything substantial.
So Gina, 420, page 427 of the document shows insurance coverages.
Oh, good. Yes, that's right. That's in our risk management. Thank
Right.
you.
So tort liability, 5 million, 10,000 per occurrence.
Okay. My last question is, I've got a whole bunch of tabs here. And so are we going to be looking at these different programs like we did in the past so that these questions could come out in the appropriate place rather than, you know, just tossing them out here?
So as we did last budget cycle, we are just opening it up to questions. You know, I hope people have had an opportunity to read through it, rather than, I don't want to say waste people's time, because it's not wasting time, but in order to be more efficient, we really want to focus on those items that people have questions about. So, and we welcome those questions in advance. If you would like to email those to you, we can have those ready to go at the next budget meeting, or even send them out to you beforehand.
I could do that. I guess there's a couple of them that I'd like to just go after, and that there's about 11 positions that the fire department is losing, I guess, or dismantling. Where are they coming from? Are they going to be, you know, taken out of North Albany, or are they going to be taken out of, well, where are they going to lose those positions from?
Oh, thank you, Terry. And Gina, if you don't mind, I'll step in if Chairman Summers doesn't mind.
That's fine.
Yeah, so Chief Wooten is on the line, and he's prepared to answer those questions. In general, the approach for the budget is to address this as a citywide budget, understanding that it's an interconnected budget, and the city's programs work together and complement each other. There are specific and very severe departmental impacts, as I noted in the budget message. And one of those is the loss of 11 positions in the fire department. So I would invite Chief Wooten to go ahead and address those.
Verde, to answer your question, those 11 positions, and it's in the budget document, 2 of them are currently unfilled. So the training lieutenant, as well as a senior deputy fire marshal position. But then there's 9 positions that will actually be layoffs, laying someone off. And those positions are, and there are 2 single role employees, like City Manager Tronson had mentioned. They are, if you remember from other budget meetings or meetings, maybe when you were even on the Public Safety Commission, their primary responsibility is just working the ambulance and taking inter-facility transfers from hospital to hospital. So that workload will then just go back onto the regularly signed firefighters on shift. And then we also are losing a deputy fire marshal position. So we have 2 deputy fire marshals. We'll reduce 1. So the amount of time that we spend out in doing inspections of businesses, you know, as you can imagine, will be reduced in half. But specifically to your question about the 6 firefighter positions, we haven't made a decision yet whether or not those losses, those layoffs will occur at the North Albany station or the East End station. But those 2 stations are the stations that we're looking at making those reductions. And we'll let the data drive that decision. Basically, which station's the slowest, which unit is the slowest. We'll have to rely on the data to decide that.
I was afraid you might say that about North Albany, because, you know, we up here are afraid that there'll be a log jam at the river and the bridge, and if emergency services have to come across the river to get to us, we're going to be hurting.
So Chair Summers, if I may,
Yes.
We also need to receive public comment tonight.
Yes.
So I am a little concerned that we may be running out of time.
You are correct. So that's what Thursday's meeting's for, is to start going through questions like Terry is bringing forward right now. So continue to peruse the document and bring your questions with you for Thursday night's meeting. That's what I recommend. And right now, it is time for public comment. And I will actually read the script this time. Persons wanting to ask questions and comment on the budget document and or provide written materials electronically for the public record must email city clerk. Somebody needs to mute themselves, please, because I'm getting lots of feedback. Thank you. Must email the city clerk before noon, the day of the first meeting, which was today, May 4, 2021. Alternatively, written testimony may be addressed to the finance director's office and must be received before noon on the day of the meeting. And that would be today, and subsequent meetings I'm not sure of. So I would assume that if there are questions, they would have to be delivered to the same locations by noon of that day.
Chair Summers?
Yes, ma'am.
We're only accepting public comment for the first meeting.
All
That
right.
was how it was noticed.
Thank you. I stand corrected. Then do we have any written comments, Gina?
We do. If you would like, I can share the screen and show you
Please do.
the letter.
Please do.
Yes, I read that.
Okay.
Would you like it read, or would you just like to read it yourselves?
To have it put into the record, I think it would be a good idea to read it.
Would you like to do that, or would you like me to do that?
Hold on a minute. I will get, let's see. Would you do that? Because I can't seem to find that particular.
Okay. So it's dated May 2nd, 2021. And it is from Kathleen Morris. And she wrote, to the Budget Committee, I am writing in support of the Albany Public Library and asking that, when possible, general fund monies be allocated to support their programs. I'm writing this as a donor and supporter of the library, as well as a user of their programs and an avid reader. I do not live in city limits, but am a Lynn County resident and have purchased an Albany library card for 35 plus years. When our sons were young, the library and story time with Scott were their favorite weekly outing. Both boys got their love of libraries and reading, which helped them in their time in the Albany schools, then on to their further education and careers. Our oldest son earned his master's degree in information and library science before continuing on to law school and his career in law. This started with the Albany Library and the joy of reading it created for them. I know that currently there is a severe budget shortfall for the city and that we are in difficult and uncertain economic times. At this time, all general funds from the city have been eliminated from the library budget for this year. Unfortunately, the Friends of the Library bookstore and book sales, both important financial resources, have been canceled due to COVID restrictions. These are major sources of revenue for purchasing new books, DVDs, periodicals, and other materials to keep the library's materials current and relevant. A strong, currently stocked library, free to all within city limits, is vital for the education, creative inspiration, and well-being of our community. Thank you for your time and consideration, Kathleen Morris.
Thank you.
If I may comment on that, I did talk to Ms. Morris a week and a half ago or so, and she understands that we do have general fund monies for library services. The main issue is circulating materials. Those in the last budget and this current budget are being funded by outside organizations such as the Friends of the Library and grants and the permanent funds.
Dick, I'll get to your question in just a moment. We still have
relating to library.
We still have a little bit of public comment left. Gina, do we have any requests to speak?
We did not.
Okay. So at this time, 8:48, I will close the public comment portion of this, and Dick, I'll take your comment.
Yes, on let's see. On page 396, I think it is. There's a list of what the Library Foundation, and that really should be the Carnegie Library Foundation, has given to the library. And it shows that for the biennium 2021 to 2019 to 2021, we gave $37,000. But I couldn't raise anybody on the phone, any of my friends that are on that Carnegie Foundation. But from memory, one of them and I added up, we think, what we did. And we had the windows restored. We had screens made for the windows. We got new blinds for the windows. And those amounted to about $50,000. We donated money to the summer reading program at about $10,000. And in each of those 2 years, we gave about $40,000 to buy books. So that's about $80,000 for the biennium to buy books. That adds up to about $132,000 that the foundation gave, rather than the fairly measly looking $37,000. Then for the 2021-23, it shows that we might be giving $13,400, and we're still debating how much to give. With the past council, there were threats of selling the building, getting rid of the building, a variety of threats. And we are thinking we need to save up our foundation money, which we have somewhere $1.10 million to $1.15 million, we think. Goes up and down depending on the stock market. But if we have to fight it legally, we want to be prepared to do that. So to save the building, save the Carnegie Library. So I'm pleased to see that the budget doesn't show the Carnegie Library going by the boards. So I thought I'd point that out, that the Library Foundation has been fairly generous in the past. So thanks.
Thank you, Dick. And we are.
May I ask a question, sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. With regard to Ms. Morris's letter, was this, my understanding was that that was in regard to the Albany Public Library, the one that's not the Carnegie Library, but the other one was, I just wanted clarification there, if someone would be so kind.
I believe it's for the Albany Public Library system.
Oh, okay. And that includes whatever libraries we have, including the Carnegie?
I believe so.
That's all I
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that the money the foundation gives for books is for the whole library system.
Cool.
And I think we're giving most all the money that goes for books in the library system.
Peter has his hand up. Peter.
I was just going to point out that our librarian, our library director is here as well, and Eric Eichenoi can comment with expertise on that question.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yes, Councillor Olson, when we spoke earlier today, what the funding that the Library Foundation has contributed for books and summer reading, that actually goes into a different fund. That it goes under the grant programs, which is listed on page 394. That's where that funding has gone into. That other Albany Public Foundation, that is just purely for the capital capital repairs that have been made to the Carnegie building. So that's.
Well, it'd be nice to have that pointed out on the page.
Yeah, I think, you know, and
maybe reference to the other page.
Yeah, maybe we can do that in the future. Put our both the Friends of the Library and the Library Foundation's contributions to our material funds, because those are two of our great sources for library materials.
All right. Now, it now says budget review, and finance director and the city manager. You're on.
I think that's just entertaining questions from the committee on the budget.
All right. And we've been entertaining some. Are there any further questions for tonight? We've got about 5 minutes.
I'll be sending my questions in writing tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, the next...
I just want to give a shout out, because last year I asked for a glossary and acronyms glossary, and it's here, and it's fabulous.
Good.
It makes it so much easier for somebody like me to review this document.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next meeting is May 6th at 6 p.m. And we have a meeting scheduled for May 11th and May 13th, and that one says if necessary. So with that, closing in on time, are there any other comments for the good of the order?
Is the public excluded from those meetings?
Not at all. Not at all. For your information, we have Matt, I don't know if you want to give the statistics for viewership tonight.
Sure. I won't have the exact numbers till tomorrow, but on the Zoom call itself, there's probably about, I'm looking here, about 3 or 4 members of the public that aren't staff or budget committee members. And then as far as Facebook Live and YouTube, there's about a half a dozen on each at the peak. So not one of our more well-attended meetings, but it can get a little dry. So,
yeah, but they don't get to comment, do they?
Oh, no, they do get to comment. It's been advertised for weeks, so they certainly do.
Oh, do they have to get their comments in on writing?
They have to follow the protocol, the procedure that we have to let the clerk know if they want to comment. So, but they certainly do have the opportunity.
Thank you.
So if I may,
yes.
So the way we noticed these meetings is that the public were able to present comment at the first meeting. And we told them exactly the process on how to do that. Going forward to these other meetings, we won't be accepting public comment at those.
That's what I understood. Thank you.
Yes.
I think it's a mistake.
But Gina, as you corrected, or as you told me earlier today, when it comes to the council consideration for adoption, there will be further opportunity for public comment.
Absolutely. We will
Correct.
notice that one also. And anybody who wishes to speak can sign up just like they had the opportunity to do today.
Good. Glad to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
We encourage it.
All right. And according to the data at the bottom of my screen, it says there were 55 participants as of about 3 minutes ago. So that's more people than I've ever seen at a budget committee meeting. So with that, if there are no further comments.
I'd like to make a comment to Will and Commissioner Keller. They're well done this evening.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, with that, I will adjourn this meeting and we'll see you Thursday.
Good night.